The Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Man, I feel like I want to give a warning to people about gym pools. Hey, people, just go use the bathroom or something. No. We're here talking about swimming and hiking before the show, and Chris and I both got deathly sick after swimming at one point. But anyway, welcome back to the show, everyone, where we explore empathy, connection, and purpose, and how they transform business from the inside out. I'm Stephen, joined by Tullio, Siragusa, my co-host, and our guest today. According to a 2024 McKinsey report, organizations that embrace flexible work models are 28% more likely to outperform their peers in employee engagement and productivity. And as remote and hybrid work has become the norm, the companies that win will be those that rethink systems, not just their schedules. Our guest today has pioneered remote work strategies and is an expert in building cultures of trust, autonomy, and performance. Tullio, please introduce our guest today.
Yes, very excited to have Chris Dyer with us, a culture catalyst and entrepreneur. Chris is a globally recognized expert in company culture and remote work, whose companies have been named a best place to work and ranked 5 times on the Inc. 5000 list of the fastest growing companies. He's been best-selling author of The Power of Company Culture and Remote Work, ranked as a #1 leadership speaker on culture by Inc. magazine, and named a top 50 global thought leader, top 40 change management guru, and a top 101 global employee engagement influencer. We're not worthy. I love this. And as a keynote speaker and advisor, Chris inspires audiences and organizations to transform how they lead, communicate, and build systems that support high-performance culture. Chris, great to have you on the show. Welcome to the show. To get us started, what originally inspired you to commit to building innovative and people-first work models? What was that drive that got you in this direction?
Well, to be honest, it was completely screwing it up, right? So it was 2008, 2009, and the big recession hit. And in my infinite wisdom, I had doubled down on mortgage companies because they were hiring a lot of people. And in the business I had at that time, like, our job was to service people and help companies when they were hiring. And so here I'm going after the mortgage companies because they're just doubling, tripling. I mean, they're just going crazy with how many they were hiring. And like I said, so they were great for business until they went out of business. And here I was standing in front of thousands of people telling them the company might close, you might lose your jobs. And like, we need big ideas. We need to figure out how we're going to survive. And they all just stared at me. Right. And here I am thinking, are they stupid? Are they, incompetent? Do they not care? And after a couple of days of being really grumpy and looking at myself in the mirror, I realized that we were in this place because of me, right? The way in which I ran the company, the way in which I was feeding the culture, the way in which everything that we had done, which worked really well when there was like 10 people in an office, but like when there's thousands of people now involved, it didn't work. And I had continued to do things that way. And ultimately, I had to figure out how to change the organization. And that's when I got really interested in, well, what's the right way to do it? Right? If I'm going to change the culture, I'm going to change what I'm going to do. What's the right way? And it turns out it's that people-centric approach. And so I got really fascinated and read every book and did everything. And we did every experiment that we could. And we figured out what worked really well for us, which, as I've put in my books, in turn, in general, works really well for most companies as well. There's a pretty standard blueprint of what you need to do, what you need to think about. And most of it's free. So it's pretty easy to go and like be more people-centric and have higher performance, higher productivity, and higher profits.
It's interesting how often some big events, when we're talking to business leaders and thought leaders, like the pandemic or the 2008 recession, or even for me going way back to the 80s recession with like my parents and how that influenced me when I was a child. But it's I really appreciate your self-awareness as a leader there. That's hard to come by a lot of times in business. And do you think it was related just because of that shock of the recession, or was it just like you said, things were going along smooth and then they're not, and you're like, what's wrong?
I think it's human nature to just to allow yourself to continue when things are okay and things are fine, like to continue to just live in that
comfort
zone, monotony, whatever it is, right? And so when these big things happen, whether it's a recession or a war or a pandemic or maybe a really big health scare, like some big thing is what actually ends up changing our behavior a lot of times. And it'd be nice if we could do it without some big thing, but like
without something kicking our butt. I agree. I mean, that's kind of why we're on the show a lot of times, trying to tell people to do this stuff. So you've long advocated for like results-based cultures and employee autonomy. What are some of the foundational shifts companies must make to move from control to trust in a distributed work environment, like we're all kind of heading toward or there for several years now?
I talk about this a lot because it is the easiest place to start, and it's usually where companies are really screwed up. We have to be radically transparent with our people, okay? And most organizations are not. So what do I mean by being radically transparent? There's a lot of places you can look and go and do some work here. I'll bet you that most people on a team, that their team members don't know what their goals are, right? So I have goals and you're my boss and we know our goals, my goals, and that's it. And maybe like above the chain, they might know my goals, but like my own team members don't know what my goals are for the year. That is insane. How can I possibly have the organization advocating for my success if the people who are sitting around me, whether that's virtually or literally, don't even know what success looks like for me? And how can they help me? And how can they keep me accountable? We talk about accountability, talk about all these big words, but like, how could I possibly keep my team member accountable or they keep me accountable? We don't know each other's goals. You want to expand from there. Does each team know what each other's team goals are? Right? Do I know what the sales team is supposed to do? Now, in some organizations, that's pretty common, but like, what is the marketing team's goals are? What are customer service team's goals? What is, all of these different departments, are we not only sharing what the goals are, but were we talking about every single month on, company-wide meeting, how it's going, what we're doing, what we're not doing, what's working, what's not working? Like, are we being transparent about that? And then if you want to go up another level, like this is the ultimate level that it took me a little while to get comfortable with this, but am I sharing the profit and loss statement? Every month, am I showing up? I mean, I'm not giving the detail, but am I giving the summary? Am I saying, hey, this is how the company's actually doing. This is how we make money. This is where we get our sales. This is where we spend our money. And what I found is when I started sharing that data, we got 35% more profitable in 1 year. I never asked my people to go find ways to save money. But when I started sharing with them how we spend the money, they started going, wait a minute, we spend how much on health insurance? We can fix that. Wait, why are there two vendors over here for this thing? We could get a better deal if we combined it and we put it into one vendor. Like they just started coming up with amazing ideas because they knew what I knew. Right? But I'm only one person. I can't do all the work. I can't come up with all the ideas. But if I don't share all of that, right? We don't have such, that's like the first place we have to start. If they don't know what we know, will never be able to help us. They will never be innovative. They will never show up and do what we want them to do because they don't know what we know. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Tullio, you've taken us through this sort of process the past year plus in our work where it's very radically transparent, to Chris's point on all that stuff.
It's a big transformation and it takes a certain level of consciousness for a CEO to want to go in that direction because it's entrusting that other people can equally be vested in the success of the business, but they can't do that unless they understand what the business is facing, both the good and the bad. So when you create that transparency, there's the common thought is there's fear that, you'll lose your good people if you share what's not going so great. Mm-hmm. Usually the opposite happens. Those great people step up and lead. So in your experience in where leaders are trying to modernize the way they approach today's work, one thing that came out very loudly is, to create radical transparency, be so transparent that everyone knows exactly what's going on. So you're coming at it from the same place. Now, what's a common mistake that a lot of leaders make as it relates to trying to modernize, and also like, any examples of what you've seen for those companies that have made that leap in terms of the impact that that's had?
So when we talk about modernizing, we talk about, we've seen that work has changed. So you may have all your people in one office, but they're still using Zoom and Teams and all these new tools, right? There's AI. Or you may be a fully remote or maybe a hybrid company. It doesn't really matter. We know that if we look at how work was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it's changed. It's changed because of tools. It's changed because of lots of different forces. And so if I always use this example of, can you imagine if like Henry Ford rolled off the first car off of the assembly line and was like, hey, we're going to, provide cars at mass here. And we know everyone really likes saddles, because everyone has a horse right now and everyone really enjoys saddles. So we're going to put a saddle in this car so you feel comfortable, right? They didn't do that, right? They didn't say, well, we're going to build the roads where the horses are currently walking, right? Like we had to come up with totally new ideas to fit the new technology, the new innovation that occurred, right? And cars is a really easy example. We had to create roads, we had to create stoplights, we had to create all new technology and have different laws and rules and things in order for that to work. We didn't try to adopt what worked with horses. And yet I see leaders taking really old business practices about meetings and how we operate and how we talk and shove it into a Zoom meeting. And then they go, oh, our culture doesn't work when we do this. We all have to be in person, or, no, it's because you're taking a really crappy old idea and trying to shove it into a new experience, right? So we have to be really intentional about, is there a better way, a new way for us to meet? And I can give you examples of like things that we did, but like that's the big mistake they make, is taking comfort into the new thing.
It's interesting. It took us 400 years to leave behind the agricultural age and embrace the industrial age. 400 years it took to actually make use of the inventions and tools that were being presented in a way that actually moved us forward. But we're still using industrial age operating models, which were intended to keep people safe. In manufacturing and in the industrial revolution, you had to have rules and processes in place that would keep people safe. It was important. But with knowledge workers today, it's like all these fixed ways of doing things, all this command and control, it actually stifles innovation because you treat people like they're children instead of adults, right? It's, people make difficult decisions every day. So how do you, what have you seen that has worked in helping leaders realize this isn't just good for people, this is also strategic? Because the good news is, at least recently, there's a lot more studies that have shown tremendous impact to the bottom line, 10x more profitability, 306% more profitability when you deal with clients this way, more productivity, all these wonderful metrics that even just if you purely focus on shareholder value, right, that shareholders would care about. But for some reason, we're not making that transition. And for those who are doing it, what's like the thing that's the catalyst for doing it? What's driving it? Is it still metrics where they see the value, or is it coming from a higher place, or both? What's the formula you're seeing in terms of, those leaders that that are open to this and the impact that they're seeing when they make this shift?
Well, I mean, you certainly have people that are open to it that are early adopters. But I think for most leaders, and this is where my work kind of comes into play, is that they need to be exposed to the new ideas. Not everyone is an idea person. So if we can go and share with them what is a better way to do it now based on the situation, most leaders are like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. I didn't know you could do it that way. I was sort of using this old model because that's the model I learned from my coaches, my teachers, my parents, my first boss, whatever it was. So a really good example of this is that it used to work really well to have one-on-one meetings all the time, right? For you and your boss to be in one-on-ones because the world worked a lot slower. And you to go in and talk to your boss and talk about your goals and do all that stuff, that worked. Like probably stopped working in the 90s, but like, let's say it worked through the 90s, okay? That doesn't work anymore. I advocate that one-on-one meetings should be dead. Now, let me give you a little caveat here. I don't mean you can't meet one-on-one if you're in a project with someone. And I don't mean you can't meet one-on-one because you need to talk to that person. I mean those one-on-ones you have as a boss with your direct report. And like every Monday at 3:00, we're supposed to get together and talk about your stuff and talk about your goals and all that. That is a complete, it's total crap. No one's doing it. They cancel them all the time. If they are doing them, they're wildly ineffective. And what ends up happening is everything's moving so fast, and yet decisions get delayed and stalled to that Monday meeting because I can't get my boss's attention. I can't get them to make a decision. In that meeting, it's sort of set up that I'm naturally asking their permission to do stuff, right? And so we've created this loop of like, I'm going to do all this stuff, but then I got to talk to my boss on Monday at 3 to get that final stamp of approval. Instead of empowering people and teaching them how to make those decisions and using that as an update, right? And so we end up stalling and things don't move quickly. Decisions don't get made. People get frustrated and then they just throw it back to their boss or they leave. And so what the new approach is to move all of that into team meetings. We should be moving those decisions if it needs some sort of approval, some sort of, eyes on it, then let's talk about it in those team meetings. Why aren't we talking to each other in the team meetings about our goals? Why aren't we being accountable to our team and everybody else in a team setting instead of in a one-on-one? So like that's a really big one that I see as a huge shift for the more modern leader.
Yeah. For us, I've seen so we're shifting all of our teams, and now our teams have their own profit and loss, that they can work with. And there is this mindset shift that's really difficult, where they're still like, well, hey, Steve, well, what do you think? I'm like, no, what do you guys think? What do you got to keep pushing back on them, to have that get to that self-managed, distributed decision-making kind of area where you're going to be twice as agile as other companies. So, and you're seeing that, right? You're seeing whenever you have companies making this shift, right? It's that self-managed shift and that team shift where now they're just instantly. I mean, there's all kinds of data behind it. Just like Deloitte study was 2 times more agile in responding to market shifts. So yeah, some examples there in your experience. How smooth of a process has that been?
Well, we have to remember that it's not like on or off. So we want to meet people where they are. And this even goes back to what we talked about, like showing financial data and all that. Not everyone's going to show up and be like, I want to be my own boss and I'm going to totally take on the company's goals. We have to provide what we can, and we're going to meet them where they want to be. And hopefully encourage and inspire them to take it a little farther all the time. But it's not like they just go from nothing to something, right? There's some messy middle always in there, and you have to be prepared and ready for that. And we're always sort of pushing and pulling with everyone, because if they were all the way in which we are, they probably would own their own business. right? And so most people are coming to work for a company are somewhere else in the middle, and we have to always be working and helping. And I think it's great that you are pushing back and asking people what they think. I had to literally for a year make a promise to myself that I would not tell anyone the answer and I would not give them my thoughts.
This is not
unless purposely don't show up to meetings.
Well, and like the caveat was unless it was illegal or it was going to cost us $1 million. Like there was a few examples. Like I think twice I broke my rule, but I had to keep going back and saying, well, tell me what you think, or go try something and let me know how it went. And even though I knew they were going to screw it up, eventually they got really good at it because they didn't have the practice. That's not their personality type. They're not entrepreneurial or high risk takers, by default. And so I had to help them get there, if that makes sense. Right. So I think we can't think about it as like they suck or they're fantastic. It's somewhere in the middle, and we're always kind of playing that game to help people.
Yeah. I think it's like sometimes we want you to lead, but you don't have to do that all the time, right? It's just you'll find your moments, pick your spots, and we're going to encourage you, empower you to be able to step up and be that leader for that moment, and you can go as long and deep, as you want to with that. But yeah, like you said, the mentality is tricky for everyone involved, for people who are not used to a new structure, and for people who are trying to lead the new structure.
And it's not their fault. I mean, the system is set up as it is now, the work environment. It's still a compliance-based system.
Mm-hmm.
You get trained to follow procedures and comply. That's the training you get. And then as a leader, you get trained on how to get compliance. So even HR certificate's all about compliance. But what we're talking about here, and this is actually interesting because now AI is really bubbling up how this is ineffective, because oddly enough, 70% of AI adoptions are being abandoned because most organizations are not ready for them. AI works in an autonomous, decentralized, agile environment. That's how you get the benefit from it. But if you've got all these steps and all these checkpoints, and you got to get the rubber stamp for everything, it's bubbling up that there's friction. You're putting the system that's supposed to be fast that can't work. But the reality is it's showing that even with people, you have a system where you can't move fast enough because there's too many steps, too many rules in place instead of empowering people to move forward. And it's not their fault. They're not being trained that way, even in MBA programs. So it's a big challenge to overcome this for sure. A tremendous challenge, no doubt.
Well,
yes, agree. No, go ahead. So when you're going through this process of trying to, shift this mindset, are there some tools or rituals or things that like you mentioned, kind of the ritual of you're not allowed to say anything regard to unless it was legal? What other kind of tools or rituals or things can you let people know would be really useful for them when they're on this journey?
Yeah, I think so. A lot of times we come up with ideas, or we want to try something, we want to do something. And if I could give you a visual, imagine like an X and a Y type of a graph, right? And so if we go to somebody and they are totally unaware of what we want them to do, or what we're asking them to do, or why we're asking them to do it, the answer should be no from them. And that is a reasonable answer. I mean, if I open a door and it's really dark in there, and you don't know who I am, you're walking down the street, I open a door, it's totally dark, and I say, hey, can you go in there? You should say no, right? And yet we do this all the time to people at work. We're like, hey, can you go do this thing? And they're like, I don't know what it is. I don't know what you're asking me to do. I don't know how to do it. And so, but the more we can give people information, so we're sort of working our way up this axis, right? The more information we can give them, the more likely they are to change or to do the new thing and to comply or to want to do it, with the exception of it has to be a good idea. Okay. So if it's a terrible idea, no matter how much information you give them, they're not going to move across this spectrum. And the example I always give to people, if I came to you and said, hey, let's go start a meth lab in the basement, right? Listen, we can make a lot of money and we'll have a yacht and like, we'll have financial freedom. I can tell you all the reasons why starting a meth lab would be a great idea, but you should be like, no, that's illegal. We're not going to do that. It's dangerous. We're going to hurt people. Like, I can't move you across that spectrum no matter how much information. I mean, for the most reasonable people, obviously there's some people that would do it.
The Walter White out there.
The only G6 we're going to see is the one they're going to fly us to Guantanamo Bay with.
Right. So, but at work, it's like we don't do that. So that's one of the big tools, is to give people more information about what it is we are asking them to do. And hopefully you're going to find a few people who are champions who go, that's an amazing idea. I love that idea. And when you find those people, the sort of second little tip is you need to get those people to go and have lunch with or have coffee with or go talk to the people who are the slow adopters. Okay. Don't worry about the people in the middle. Like literally they are unimportant in this process because they move based on how fast the fast adopters go, and they actually get pushed by the slow adopters. Because if they see the slow adopters moving forward, they're like, oh, I got to move up too, because I'm not the slow one, but I'm not like they kind of always want to sit in the middle. So but what I noticed was when I got the champions to talk to the ones who were put, their foot down and didn't want to move and didn't want to change, they got them to move quickly. Right. Or if they were a total lost cause, we figured that out and we had to deal with that. So those are two really easy ways to sort of really move change quickly through the organization without you as the leader having to like hit your head up against the wall every day.
You just reminded me of something. My very first job 36 years ago was a company that went from about $1 billion to 20 billion, mostly organically in about 9-10 years. And I remember they started this cadre program, and I couldn't understand what it was for, but I was asked to be one of the cadres, which was basically to go and be the champions for these transformational changes the organization was going through, mostly because it was preparing itself for some acquisitions and M&A activity. Mm-hmm. And it was exactly what you just mentioned. And I thought at the time, I was like, I don't get this, but it seems pretty interesting. But that is such a brilliant idea. I don't know that many companies do that effectively enough.
No, I know in our OKRs, we have the champions, right? Tullio, we need to get the champions to do exactly as hit. I'm all, yeah, I need to see this in action. Sounds awesome for sure. Hey, we've got a audience question.
Yes, we do.
Let's go to that.
It's a great question.
All right, Chris, do you have any examples or ideas of how to build a strong sense of community within a company that's fully remote?
Yeah, so a strong sense of community really comes from lots of different things. But I think if you want to like start from the very beginning, are we being radically transparent about who we are, what our goals are, and all of that, right? So people have to understand and be on board with that. And then you have to figure out the second really important thing is how do we communicate? Now, in my organization, pretty much everybody worked during normal business hours. Now, across 3 different time zones, but like normal business hours. So we could collaborate in real time in most cases. Other organizations I've worked with, their people are like in 9 time zones and they're all over the place. And so they have to work asynchronously. And that's a totally different way of working. And so building community in an asynchronous company is very different than, hey, most of the time I can get you on a call. We can have a quick Zoom. We can chat in real time on Slack or on Teams, right? So you've got to figure out what is your working environment and then build in the correct meetings and the correct touch points for that group. And it might be that like there's one team that works one way, maybe only like the tech team is async and everybody else is like on the same schedule. So it may not be one size fits all for the company, but you've got to really figure that out in order to begin to build community there.
All right, Chris, we're an asynchronous company ourselves, and I understand like exactly what you're talking about. Give me some tips here, like for that culture thing, because it is difficult. when we're able to do, things here in the US, but our team overseas, we try and get them a little bit more autonomy so they can do stuff together over there. But yeah, I think this is like you said, it's a common problem, is this sort of asynchronous remote culture building. There's a lot of words, but
so the first question is
just real quick. That question ties in nicely to this audience question too. Okay. So let's tie it together.
Go for it, Julie.
Culture can feel like a big abstract idea. What's one practical first step a new entrepreneur can take to start shaping it intentionally? So in this case, it is very common to have asynchronous situation, global type companies, even in a startup. So, what's a good way to solve that? Because I can tell you, sometimes you have those 8 o'clock calls and you have them consistently over and over. You start getting a little resentful. Like, I really want to have dinner with my family. So, those things bubble up, right?
So there's a lot of complexity here, because you're saying there's another team somewhere else. Now, are they all in one office? Like, is it just that you and them are async, or are they spread out and all working remote? So like, that's a totally different answer for those two things, right?
Yeah, remote in this case, in our case, yeah.
Okay, so they're all remote. They could be all over.
It's like a hybrid.
Okay.
Remote, but in that time zone area. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're all in the same time zone, but they're not all in the same location. Is that correct?
A good percentage. We've tried to centralize in the same location so they can occasionally meet up, but not all of them. So this is like, okay, this is the.
So I would treat their culture separate from yours. Like, I would encourage them to have that real-time culture and allow them to have meetings and interactions that are more like live. And so they create a community there in their sector, right? And then as it relates back to how do you create a community back with you all, that's going to be in more like quality over quantity. So can we have these little big moments once a month or once a week or whatever it is, when we do try to connect with them and create some kind of moment, whether that's exchanging ideas or celebrating wins or telling them how the company's doing? Like, how do we have those little moments? And then you brought up a really good point about those 8 o'clock meetings. The most successful companies, when they have people working across multiple time zones and they do have to connect like live, the ones that do it best is when they trade the pain, meaning we don't always make one group have to suffer, right? That we keep, sometimes I suffer and sometimes you suffer. And we change when that call is. So it's not always one group having to show up at 8 p.m. And if we do that, then it feels more equitable and more fair in that way. It depends. Like, I know people have entire teams in the Philippines and they just work in the middle of the night. Like, that's their shift, and they work when we work in the United States. And so that's different than if they're working when it's light for them and we're working when it's light for us. So again, the complexities here are like crazy.
Of course, I feel bad for them when they're working in the middle of the night. Why can't they work regular hours? We'll just shift around.
Yeah.
But I hear you. And that, I guess that brings the next question. This is a common question we ask all of our guests about the role that having purpose, a well-defined purpose, can play in tying everyone in. In fact, a study by PwC surveyed employees that they found that purpose at work was 3x more likely to stay long-term, like employees where they work in a place that has purpose. In terms of what we're talking about here, unifying people, bringing a culture of synchronization, creating a sense of belonging together. What role does having a well-defined culture a well-defined purpose for the company play into that, for example?
It does. It can be huge, but let's be honest. Like, if you're a teacher, if you're a police officer, if you're a firefighter, if you're a scientist or a doc, like, your sense of purpose, it's easy. It's high. Like, why you're doing that job, and and so, like, if your job is, we're in marketing, what is your purpose, right? It's not as easy to define there than if, like, I decided to go be a teacher and I'm going to go work with 6th grade kids and, like, I'm trying to. So you have to be, the idea of purpose sounds really straightforward, but if your company and what you do, it isn't quite so easy to decide what that purpose is. You've got to spend some big time to really understand. So maybe if you're a marketing company, your purpose is to help organizations grow or to be stable or to be, to maximize their ability to reach their clients. Like, what is that thing? And then are you communicating that to your employees? And does that purpose align with them? Okay. Now, if you have a team in the Philippines, maybe they don't really care about that. Maybe that's not a strong enough purpose for them. Maybe the purpose, the sub purpose for them is that this job is a way to not only feed themselves, but feed their entire family. Like, that job may be, the purpose is a lifeline to their entire family set. So maybe that's what you need to drive, right? We got to figure out what that purpose is, and does it align for that subgroup as well? Because with some of my organizations, like, our larger purpose could work for 60 or 70% of our employees, but it didn't work for another percentage. And so we would come up with sub purposes for them that connected into their work, and that really helped fill the gap. So,
and that's a noble purpose too. I mean, taking care of your family is a noble purpose. I'm hearing the need to be adaptable. We had one guest last week saying, I'd like not to be poor. I mean, that's a very good purpose also, interesting.
Yeah, no, I do like that idea of like the sub purpose. Like, so we did this exercise with a company where it was like trying to every single person give their input on their, like you said, Chris, earlier in the show, like their goals and, their whatever higher purpose they may feel or calling. And so we're able to kind of align a lot of our values and things around that. But I imagine there's like some sub purposes in there we could go back to and try and rework a little bit some of our approach and some things. It's really interesting. Chris, what advice would you give leaders who want to redesign their work for the future and kind of the manners we're talking about, but are unsure where to start?
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly you need to be thinking about AI, of course, but I think the step above that is we need to be thinking about how do we equip our people to deal with change more effectively. I honestly think this is your last summer, right? This is like the summer of '69. This is your February right before the pandemic hit, right? This is that moment where right now we're in total bliss and innocence. Like, we don't feel that way, but we're about to have this. I mean, ChatGPT 5 is going to come out, and what's going to happen and how AI is going to impact business and impact our lives is going to massively change, right? Because ChatGPT got 800 million users in 17 months. It took smartphones 5 years to do that. It took Netflix 10 years to do that. It took just ChatGPT 17 months. I'm not talking about Claude, I'm not talking about Perplexity, any of those other tools. So we're about to have just insane amounts of change. So that's what we need to be focused on, is not like what they need to do with AI or what they need to do with these other things. It's how do they deal with change themselves, right? And how do we help our people shed some of their bad habits, get rid of things that don't matter anymore, find better ways to do things, but start internal. I mean, Tullio, you brought up the point, it took 400 years for us to start using the tools from an industrial revolution. Like, we can't go 400 years trying to use the tools from AI. We're going to have to be able to help our people do a better job of being okay with change, making change happen, and not thinking about change as a negative, but as a way to thrive.
Yeah, that 400 years, like, the gap keeps getting smaller and smaller as we're moving, as we're evolving, and getting to the information age and all that. It's smaller and smaller. And like Chris said, like, we're talking, months, a few years, and we're going to be feeling this next big change. Very.
I think to Chris's point, to your point, AI is going to force those leftover things that have survived through all these changes. It's going to force a dramatic shift very quickly, because some of those things that have survived the Industrial Revolution in terms of processes that don't serve today's business, AI is going to shake it all up very quickly. So it's going to be a wake up call. It's already being a wake up call for sure. Yeah.
So, Chris, question I always ask our guests, And Tullio, even you just talking about that makes me think about the resistance that people are going to be feeling to all this change and everything. It's always that resistance, often to something that's related to love, compassion, empathy. When you step back and look at the business, it's a lot of resistance to those kind of things people are uncomfortable with. But Chris, what role does love play in business?
Well, it plays a massive role. You need to love what you're doing. You need to love, the company that you. I think if you're in leadership, I think you need to really love what the company does. I mean, if you're, an entry level person, do you need to love the company? Probably not. But you got to have that love in there, whether that's loving what you're doing, loving what the company does, loving the outcomes for clients, loving some of the people that you work with. You don't have to love everybody, but it has to be a part, because we know that, and I'm going to steal this from my buddy Seth Madison, who's a great keynote speaker. He talks about this whole message about made with love, right? You think about the things in your life that are the best things, like your grandma making you a pie, or your mom making you that thing when you were a kid. Like the things that were made with love are the best things. And he does this wonderful job of sort of bringing that point to life in his keynotes. And I think that translates into work too, right? The things that we love and the people that we love, those are the best things about everything we're doing. And it shields us from the things we don't like to do, the things that we have to do, the things we wish we didn't have to do, the tough conversations we have to have, because we ultimately love is that counterbalance.
Chris, it's been great to have you. I think no matter what happens, empathy, love, compassion, that will never go out of style. There's always room for more of that, right? It's been great to have you on the show today. How can people connect with you?
You can go to chrisdyer.com. I'm happy to connect. I'm on all the social platforms, TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, all that stuff. And if anybody would like a little handy dandy guide on how to run your meetings better and how to ask better questions at work, I'm happy to send you a little free PDF. You just need to text 33777 and put my name, Chris, as the message, and you'll get it right away.
Excellent.
Say that again, 33777. Right?
Yep, and just Chris is the message.
All right. All right. Thank you, Chris. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. If this conversation inspired you to think differently about work and leadership, please share it with someone in your network. And we'll see you next time on the Bliss Business Podcast.